Greetings, loyal subjects of the Imperium of Man. I am Librarian Elias of the Adeptus Astartes. I am creating a series of recordings with the intent of educating the general populace of the dangers of the galaxy. All of this information comes from the Lexicanum, provided to me by the Adeptus Mechanicus. I will be reading verbatim from their archives. This recording will cover one of the many foes the Imperium faces. Primarch of the 12th Legion, Angron. Angron, also known as the Red Angel, and originally as Angronius of Nuceria, Lord of the Red Sand, is the Primarch of the World Eaters. He was raised on the brutal world of Nuceria, fighting as a gladiator slave and having his aggression enhanced by surgical implants known as the Butcher's Nails. The only Primarch taken into service of the Emperor against his will, he fell to chaos during the Post-heresy, afterwards becoming a demon prince of Khorne. Savage and in a state of constant rage, he was nonetheless renowned for his battle prowess, and alongside Leman Russ and Vulcan, was considered to be one of the most physically powerful Primarchs. The Chaos emissary to Lorgar called him the Fighter. The following is a description of the Primarch before he fell to chaos. Khan, captain of the 8th Assault Company of the Warhounds, the previous name for the World Eaters, was struck by his Primarch's visage when he first saw it. Wiry, copper-red hair curled away from a high brow. Pale eyes sat deep behind cheekbones that angled down like axe strokes to an aquiline nose and a broad, thin-lipped mouth. It was the face of a general to follow unto death, the face of a teacher whose feet the wise would fight to sit, the face of a king made for the adoration of worlds, the face of a Primarch, and rage made it the face of a beast. Rage pulsed and distorted the features like a tumor breaking out from the skull beneath. It made the eyes yellow, empty pits, debased the proud lines of brow and jaw, peeled the lips back from the teeth. According to the custom of the gladiators he was raised among, Angron cut scars into his torso after each of his battles, and a continuing length known as the Triumph Rope. For every victory, the scar would be left to heal normally, while for every defeat, the warrior would work some dirt into the wound and cause the scar to turn black. Angron was the only gladiator in this world's history without any black scars. The Primarch Corvus Corax believed that no other Primarch could have bested Angron in single combat, save for Horus and perhaps Sanguinius. Leman Russ was often considered his equal, while Rogel Dorn, on the other hand, believed that he could easily defeat Angron, and feared him much less as an adversary than he did Horus. Before possessing the Butcher's Nails, Angron displayed an inherent psychic ability which allowed him to not only feel, but also somehow absorb the pain and negative emotions of others. He used this ability to calm child slaves in the caves of Nuceria. During the scattering, the boy who would become known as Angron was thrown into the civilized world of Nuceria, far from Terra. He plummeted into the icy mountains of that planet, and not long after, a slaver found him in a scene of carnage. Surrounding the wounded young Primarch were the corpses of numerous Xenos. Imperial scholars would later theorize that they were Eldar who had foreseen the great bloodshed that Angron would cause and had tried unsuccessfully to stop him. After being enslaved and nursed back to health by the planet's ruling masters, known as High Riders, Angron was brought to the planet's capital, Deschia. Still a frightened young child, he was subsequently dumped into a pit consisting of a single ziggurat with hundreds of other slaves. Acid filled the pit, and to the cheers of the spectators, Angron was eventually forced to kill all around him in order to stand upon the ziggurat's upmost platform and survive. Shedding a tear for the last time, Angron was proclaimed a promising newcomer to Dishea's arena combat and given the name Angron Thalkir, which meant Child of the Mountain and the property of House Thalkir. After this, Angron became a famed gladiator known as the Unbeaten, becoming a fan favorite of Dishea and reaping many victories. The closest thing he had to a father during this time was the older gladiator on a mouse. But after the duo managed to slay 2 berserk Ogrins, his masters ordered the 2 to fight one another to the death. Angron refused, and the High Riders ordered that he undergo a psychosurgery known as the Butcher's Nails as punishment. Upon being implemented with the nails, Angron was loosed upon Anya Mouse and killed him in a blind frenzy. When Angron regained his senses, the despair of this revelation caused him to unleash a bestial howl for days. The death of Anya Mouse proved to be the last straw for Angron, and he led a slave revolt among his fellow gladiators. Gathering a great army of slaves, they fled into the mountains of the planet, where he lived for several years. The civilized cities sent armies to destroy Angron, but none were able to oust the Primarch and met the same demise. Nonetheless, the issue was never in doubt. His forces had little to eat, and the barren mountains were exhausted from the constant battling. His fate seemed sealed when 7 well-equipped armies surrounded Angron and his starving forces. In desperation, Angron fed his trusted comrades his own blood to keep them alive. Just as the battle was about to begin, the Emperor of Mankind's fleet arrived in orbit over the planet. The Emperor teleported directly to Angron's point of deployment with a few trusted Adeptus Custodes. The Emperor promised Angron a legion made in his image, limitless power, and lifetime spent perfecting the art of conquest. But to the Emperor's surprise, Angron refused. He chose instead to die amongst his comrades while fighting his oppressors. Reluctantly, the Emperor returned to his flagship above, yet, just as the battle was about to begin, the Emperor teleported Angron against his will back up to the fleet. Angron could only watch in anguish as those he regarded as his brothers and comrades were quickly annihilated. In a rage, Angron killed one of the Custodes members, which surrounded him, but was forced into a state of submission by the Emperor's psychic might. Angron angrily asked why the Emperor did not intervene to save his comrades upon Nuceria's surface, but the Emperor dismissed the question as lacking vision. He was the Emperor and had his eyes set upon the galaxy, not a single tyrant battling a slave revolt. The Emperor expressed hope that Angron in time would learn to understand what he had done. Angron stated to the Emperor that he was meant to die upon Nuceria, and now but a ghost remains. The Emperor replied that a ghost would suffice for what he had planned for him. Before Angron could reply, he was teleported to a nearby vessel of the 12th Legion, this time known as the Warhounds. Angron initially refused to have anything to do with his legion, and when several captains tried to talk to him, he brutally killed them, as they had been ordered by the Emperor to not raise a hand against Angron. The dead included the acting Legion commander, Gear. Eventually, Captain Khan of the 8th Assault Company managed to form a rapport with Angron, talking about the rituals of Angron's gladiators and the traditions of the Warhounds. Now convinced of their worthiness, Angron took full control of his legion, which he renamed the World Eaters, saying they would form new traditions together. However, in the early days of Angron's leadership, he still refused to acknowledge most of his sons, who could not survive the implantation of the Butcher's Nails. At one point, Angron simply abandoned his legion, hijacking a frigate and disappearing. After 2 years of searching, Khan was able to track him down to a feral world where Angron lived like a savage, and revealed that he was simply seeking a foe that could put him out of his misery. Khan eventually convinced Angron to rejoin the Legion by reminding him that his Nucerian comrades would hate to see him in this state, and with the promise that he would try to lead the World Eaters to shed their weakness. Most infamously, Angron ordered that the World Eaters conquer the targeted world within 31 hours, a single Nucerian day, and the time he had scored his greatest victory upon the planet. The World Eaters consistently failed to capture worlds within this time limit, and each time, Angron ordered decimation as punishment, forcing 1 out of every 10 World Eaters to be killed by his other 9 brothers. After several of these episodes, Centurion Margot finally refused to again enact decimation after the Gehenna campaign. This caused Angron to be thrown into a rage frenzy, during which he murdered several nearby World Eaters until being subdued by his librarians, while Angron lay comatose and had his memories of Nuceria absorbed by the young Lexicadum Tethys. A crisis erupted across the Legion as Margot attempted to stop Galan Surlak from installing the perfected Butcher's Nails into all of the World Eaters. Mago's revolt came to its climax on Gehenna, where Khan slew the rebel Centurion, while Angron slew Tethys. Now at the head of a legion wielding the nails, Angron reaped many victories across the Great Crusade, although some criticized the extreme and bloodthirsty tactics he used to ensure the destruction of his opponents. At some point, following the rediscovery of Angron, Magos Arkan land of the Adeptus Mechanicus was brought into a secret laboratory hidden in a dormant volcano in a tundra location on Terra to aid in the Emperor's investigation of Angron's crude augmetics as the Primarch lay unconscious. Land had previously experienced the device taking over Angron's body, having seen it when investigating the Hexarchian vaults before he ordered them sealed due to the threat the items within presented to the machine cult. He told the Emperor that it was called the Crucimen, but the versions he saw were more crude. The Emperor explained that the implants were not of his doing, and that he believed they led to Angron's instability. He also explained that they were recreated to remove the ability to enjoy anything but anger. When asked if the Emperor could remove it, he admitted he could, but the tendrils were deep in Angron's head and spine, and he was missing his limbic lobe and insular cortex. Butcher's Nails therefore replaced part of Angron's brain, allowing him to live. During the Night of the Wolf, the Emperor himself criticized Angron for the changes he made to his recruits. Like all other gladiators on his home world, Angron had received special nerve implants known as the Butcher's Nails, which tremendously heightened his aggressiveness, but also had the side effect of uncontrollable rages outside of battle. Angron ordered his tech marines and apothecaries to duplicate the technology, and that all recruits undergo the process that would turn them into aggressive and fearless warriors. Despite the obvious advantages, the Emperor was displeased and ordered him to stop. Angron paid him no heed and continued the unsavory practice secretly. This led to the World Eaters being criticized for their general bloodlust and barbarity by their fellow legionaries. They were known for blood rituals when not in combat, and competed with each other for the number of enemy heads they could take in battle. Eventually, the Emperor dispatched the Space Wolves and Leman Russ to Malkoya to deal with Angron and demand an end to both the Butcher Nail surgeries and massacres carried out by the World Eaters. A tense standoff between Wolves and World Eaters resulted in all-out warfare, eventually breaking out in a brief but bloody battle. Angron engaged Russ in single combat, defeating Russ, but allowing himself to become encircled by Russ's bodyguards in the process. Angron failed to understand that his bloodlust and disregard for both his life and his legionaries had allowed him to become encircled. Disappointed that his brother had not learned this lesson, Russ ordered a retreat. Angron saw this as a victory, for while he would have fallen had Russ gave the order to open fire, he had bested the wolf, and the World Eaters suffered fewer casualties than their enemies. After this debacle, the Emperor dispatched Horus to bring Angron back in line. A fatal error, as Horus was already corrupted by the forces of chaos. As a master psychologist, Horus told Angron exactly what he wanted to hear, that the Emperor was a weakling, devoid of honor, and that there was a place for him in a new order, along with revenge against the brother Primarchs that had criticized his legion. Angron needed no further convincing, throwing his legion on Horus's side when the Horus heresy broke out. During the heresy, Angron would team up with the Shadow Crusade with Logar and his word bearers to strike at Ultramar in conjunction with the traitor offensive at the Battle of Twelfth. Angron, seeing Logar as a weakling, refused to cooperate with him and frequently wasted time sacking and butchering strategically worthless targets. The tensions between the two Primarchs boiled over to a near battle, which was only interrupted by a Dark Eldar attempt to assassinate Angron himself. After the two Primarchs worked together against the Dark Eldar, they decided to put their feud aside. However, Logar, recognizing Angron's instability and hidden sorrow over his forced departure from Nuceria, recommended that Angron return to his adopted homeworld to find a sense of closure, as well as possibly overcome the Butcher's Nails, which was slowly killing him. When the two Primarchs arrived, however, they discovered the slave lords of Nuceria had massacred Angron's comrades and told the population that he had fled during their last stand. Infuriated, Angron ordered that the World Eaters and Word Bearers purge Nuceria of its population. During the battle against Imperial forces, Angron saved Logar by stopping a Warhound Titan's foot with his bare hands before it could stomp on his brother. Later, the Ultramarines led by Guilliman arrived, determined to exact vengeance on the traitors for the Battle of Twelfth. Angron went to duel Guilliman himself during the battle, defeating the Primarch in a furious rage, but while Guilliman managed to escape thanks to an intervention by nearby Ultramarines, this was precisely what Logar had wanted. The Wordbear's Primarchs began a coordinated ritual, using Angron's rage as a conduit. Logar channeled the power of Khorne and surged the Red Angels with the powers of chaos. Angron was transformed into a hulking, even more bloodthirsty avatar of violence and rage that had overcome the debilitating effects of the Butcher's Nails. For his new form, he was given a massive black rune sword forged by the Dark Mechanicum. The first words that the newly ascended Angron spoke was his desire for Khan to massacre slaves in the lower decks of the Conqueror and build him a skull throne. Angron and his world eaters went on to mindlessly rampage throughout the galaxy, ignoring Horus's calls to muster at Ulanor in preparation for the drive on Terra. Perturabo himself was eventually sent with orders to bring Angron to Ulanor at all costs. Upon the world of Deluge, the Iron Warriors arrived to find the population butchered and stacked into mountains of corpses. After withstanding an assault by crazed world eaters and cornate demons, the sky opened up and Angron himself entered the carnage. Perturabo and Angron engaged in a brutal battle, with the demon having the clear edge in power and speed. However, despite taking many wounds, Perturabo endured and goaded Angron, declaring that he was born a slave and was now a slave to darkness for all eternity. By using the Iron Warriors' Iron Circle and Volk to outmaneuver and bombard the World Eaters, Angron was bested as an Ultramarines fleet appeared in orbit over Deluge. Angron laughed and declared that they were all now going to die, but Perturabo reminded the demon Primarch that he had seen his warriors butchered while he had done nothing once before. This moved Angron enough to act, and after creating a warp storm, the Iron Warriors and World Eaters fleets were able to escape the Ultramarines and move to Ulanor, where they accompanied Horus for the muster. Angron subsequently appeared in the climax of the Solar War as a massive warp rift opened over Luna, which allowed the primary traitor of Strikeforce to assail Terra itself. Angron was seen perched aboard one of the battlements of the Conqueror. By the Siege of Terra, Angron was a blood-crazed slave to Khorne. He demanded that Horus allow him to directly attack the Imperial Palace, regardless of the fact that the Emperor's psychic barrier around the world would see him likely die in the process, until such a time where the traitors could weaken it. After hearing that Mortarian's Death God would be instead the first to assault Terra, Angron fell into a rage and massacred all he came across within the bowels of the Conqueror. Latara Serin, the captain of the Conqueror, feared that he would murder the tech priests attending to the vessel's reactor, risking a catastrophic meltdown. This forced Khan to confront Angron within the ship, where the Primarch revealed he knew of the 8th Captain's ultimate destiny, and wished to supplant him as the chosen of Khorne. The two battled, with Khan being little match for his Gene father. However, before Angron could finish him, Khan placed a teleport home on the Primarch, which transported him to the shifting maze within the nearby Night Lord's flagship Nightfall Within. Angron became trapped and spent his time battling the many traps within the maze. Later, when traitor rituals weakened the Emperor's psychic barrier on Terra, Angron was shot out of the Nightfall and into space, where he made his way to the surface. Angron appeared in front of Terra as a flaming meteor, landing and slaying friend and foe alike. He fought his way to the walls of the palace, where he saw Sanguinius and roared for a challenge. Sanguinius refused, saluting his brother and stating that they would battle one day. This was not that day. Angron raged, but due to the lingering effects of the Emperor's barrier, could not pursue him into the palace. During the battle for the Lion's Gate spaceport, Angron destroyed a Capital Imperialis and then a Leviathan, but it was again unable to advance past the palace walls when the Lion's Gate spaceport fell to a massive traitor assault, and the Emperor's shield shrunk to only encompass the Sanctum Imperialis. Angron led a horde of world eaters onto the Eternity Wall. Angron and Khan led an assault on the Eternity Wall spaceport, and in a moment of clarity, the Primarch regained some of his old, noble visage. He gave an opportunity for the defenders of the spaceport to surrender, though they responded by blasting him to pieces with their gun batteries. Angron quickly regenerated, and along with his world leaders, massacred the defenders of the Eternity Wall spaceport. He later struck down the lone Imperial Army trooper Alanius Piers, soon become mythologicalized as Alanius Pius, as the mortals stood before him. In the prelude to the Siege of the Eternity Gate, the barely sentient Angron was psychically guided by Horus to find and kill Sanguinius. At the feet of Eternity Gate itself, Angron finally met Sanguinius in battle. Though weakened from his earlier fight with Kabanda, Sanguinius nonetheless faced his demonic brother. After a climactic airborne battle, Angron impaled Sanguinius upon his black blade. However, Sanguinius used the opportunity to rip out Angron's butcher's nails, causing the demon's Primarch's head to explode as Angron pleaded. With Angron banished into the warp, the world leaders lost whatever sanity they had and began to cut down their own allies. This broke the traitor advance just short of the Eternity Gate. Eventually, Horus was slain by the Emperor, and the traitors were forced to flee Terra in defeat. Already savage and brutal, the world leaders quickly found a new master in the form of the blood god Khorne, eternally demanding sacrifice and skulls. Angron led his legion to their worship and oversaw his legion's retreat into the Eye of Terra. Post-heresy, during the middle of the 38th millennium, Angron and 50,000 Khorne berserkers sorted their way through Imperial space for over 2 centuries. This incident became known as the Dominion of Fire. The wars and rebellions of the forces of Khorne ravaged over 70 sectors. In the end, it took 4 Space Marine chapters, 2 Titan legions, and more than 30 Imperial Guard regiments to retake what the Imperium had lost. 90% of the area has since been recovered by the forces of mankind. During the First War of Armageddon, in 444 M41, Angron invaded the Imperial Hive world Armageddon. He led 4 World Leaders companies and a demonic host against the local defenders and their space wolf allies. Angron's forces ravaged the planet, but he was continually forced to slow his advance to erect monuments to Khorne in order to sustain his demonic form in the Materium. In the end, however, he was defeated when he was confronted by a force of 109 Grey Knights. Angron and his escort of 12 bloodthirsters, the Kuror Praetoria, initially decimated the Grey Knights sent before him, until a newer recruit, an extraordinarily powerful psycho named Hyperion, managed to first snap, then break the Black Blade at the height of the struggle. Now at a disadvantage, Angron was banished back to the warp by Brother Captain Terramar Aurelian in a battle that only 13 Grey Knights survived. Angron's current status is that after the formation of the Great Rift, the Salamanders prevented an attempt to summon him upon Armageddon. Sometime after, Angron appeared once more to lead a vast Khornate host against the Dominus Crusade fleet Quartus on the world of Malakabale. This interferes with the plans of the demon Vastor, who is traveling to Malakabale to deal with the situation. Angron's Wargear, like his brother Primarch's, was unique to him. During the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, Angron wielded the twin chain axes, Gorechild and Gorefather. Before these twin weapons, he wielded the primitive chain axe Widowmaker, which was broken in battle against Leman Russ during the Night of the Wolf. To replace it, Angron took up the massive axe Brazen Tooth, which was eventually given to the Wordbearers as a sign of their allegiance. For protection, Angron wore a massive suit of power armor, designed from his Nucerian gladiatorial armor, known as the Armor of Mars. Angron also wielded the plasma pistol's Spite Furnace, and upon becoming a demon prince, Angron abandoned most of his mortal weaponry, taking up the demon weapon known as the Black Blade. Upon his recent return to the Materium, Angron has taken up the demon weapon as Seminarius and Chainax Spine Grinder. This concludes the information regarding Angron. More in-depth information regarding him will be recorded at a later date. This is Librarian Elias, signing